All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. My name is Kay Nieskash. I am the event lead here at Matter. Matter is a healthcare technology incubator and innovation hub with a mission to accelerate the pace of change of healthcare. And we do three things in service of this mission. First, we incubate startups. Since we launched in 2015, we have worked with more than 800 companies that range from very early to growth stage startups, and we have a suite of services to help them at every stage of their development. Second, we work with large organizations such as health systems, life science companies, and payers to strengthen their innovation capacity. We help them find value in emerging technology solutions, empower internal innovators to unlock the value of their ideas, and create a more human-centered healthcare experience through system-level collaborations. And third, we are a nexus for people who are passionate about healthcare innovation. We bring people together to be inspired, to learn, and to connect with each other. And we produce a lot of programs, so including large-scale events such as today for the broader community and small forums exclusively for our members in our community. So right now I will kick off to Randy from Orthogonal, and he will be our moderator today and introduce the rest of our program. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. On behalf of myself and Bernhard Kapp, our CEO, and thanks to our awesome partners at Matter, we're really glad to see a great turnout of people here today. We appreciate you logging in. We don't take it for granted that you're giving us an hour or two of your time right now, and I promise we will try to pack 4 times that amount into the content for the webinar for you today, so you can leave with at least several gold nuggets of actionable insights, hopefully. And thanks to our guests today, who we'll introduce shortly. As a lot of you know, Orthogonal, we do these webinars about once a month, and we try to join forces several times a year with Matter to produce webinars. And we're here because we're trying to accelerate patient outcomes faster by helping medical device manufacturers improve their delivery of software as a medical device, connected device systems, and digital therapeutics. And to do that by fusing modern product management and software engineering techniques with our industry's historic focus on safety and effectiveness as done through compliance and regulation. So these webinars for us are a way of really trying to help everybody accelerate patient outcomes faster. So for about the first 50 minutes, we'll have a discussion with our panelists. We will definitely try and incorporate your questions throughout as they make sense. And if not, we will be fielding questions at the end before the breakout. We actually, this session will actually go on longer than 60 minutes. And we're actually pleasantly surprised that usually about 40% of the people are still there all the way through. I know many of you have to drop off. So today's topic, medical device data and evidence, an integrated approach. We knew this was a big topic stepping into it, but as we got together to prepare for this discussion, it became clear we could probably do, months and months and months worth of webinars on this. So I think today we're going to try and really go broad rather than deep. So at a high level, if you're bringing a device to market, there's a bunch of gauntlets you have to run to get a device that's both commercially successful and clinically successful. And the people you have to get through are investors, internal or external, regulators, payers, and then providers and patients. And if you don't get approval from all of those groups, you're never going to make it to the end. And all of these groups want data as part of what they're looking for up front to prove that this device is going to be commercially and or clinically successful. And they're looking at questions like, is the device effective as claimed? Is it safe to use? Is there an ROI? What's the comparative effectiveness compared to all the other options? Will it fit into the lives of patients and the workflow of providers? And after all of that, do we think this thing could actually break even or even make some profit, and how much and in what period of time? These are a pretty complicated set of questions, and these different stakeholders have overlapping sets of interest in these questions. And I think what we're trying to get to today is this idea that if we can take a more integrated strategic view of these things up front, we can play a much more sophisticated game in terms of data collection that I think will really raise the odds of medical device manufacturers reaching the success line at the other side. And so today's about doing that and about really what's changed in recent years. I think that's enabling us to take a more integrated look at this. This is definitely a known pain point in the industry. Very quickly, I'll conclude. Our three panelists, Christian Johnson, Jennifer McKinney, and Kwame Ulmer, can tell you a little bit about the MedTech study that they recently conducted under UCLA Biodesign, which I think had a fair number of results from their research that came back related to this. Bernhard just got back yesterday from AdvaMed CEO Summit, where he's with about, I don't know, 80 or 90 MedTech CEOs and general managers. And I think he'll be able to tell you how timely this conversation is for all of them and people at MedTech device companies. And lastly, the Digital Medicine Society recently did a survey of top concerns for digital health leaders. And the question of data misalignment between the FDA and CMS, in a more narrow view, the regulator and the payer, came back as the number one problem that everybody identified. And on the basis of that, they've actually spun up an initiative to start to work on some practical solutions towards some of the things we're going to discuss today. So is this a question of known knowns, known unknowns, or unknown unknowns? The answer is all of the above. There's a lot of angles to this, and with that, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists today. And I'll add, by the way, as we said, this is kind of like a band reunion for Christian and Jennifer and Kwame, and they can explain a little bit about that. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and also you guys can come off speaker or come on speaker on video. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you did to earn yourself a spot here. Or subject yourself to a spot here, I should say. Kwame, you want to go first?
Absolutely, and thank you, Randy. I've been fortunate enough to work collaboratively with Dr. Jennifer McKinney and Christian Johnson in some research where we talked to over 100 MedTech CEOs and assess the time from concept to clearance for their products. And I came to this relationship with Jennifer because of two roles I play. One is I'm fortunate enough to lead MedTech Impact Partners, which is a regulatory strategy consulting firm where we work with MedTech companies only to help them navigate the US FDA. And two, I'm fortunate enough to serve as a venture partner at Wavemaker 360 Health, which is a healthcare-only focused fund. And I sit on the board of Ascendia, which is a company with an aim to accelerate the application process for the FDA and other regulatory bodies. So I'm delighted to be in conversation with you all. And thank you, Randy, for bringing the band back together again. And I'll pause there and wait for more conversation shortly.
Jennifer, you want to introduce yourself?
I just told Christian he could go next, Randy. We're basically taking over the webinar from under your feet. First, I just want to thank Matter and Orthogonal for having us this morning. Bernard and Randy have been excellent partners in our past research to really accelerate innovation here at UCLA Biodesign. But so a little bit about myself. I'm a faculty member here at the David Geffen School of Medicine and the Anderson School of Management, where I teach with Professor Ulmer down there in the bottom left-hand corner, my Brady Bunch screen. So we're just wrapping up a great quarter at Anderson on health tech entrepreneurship, which Kwame is leading this year. A few other hats that I wear. I'm the executive director of UCLA Biodesign, and we really take kind of just like we're talking about here today, a holistic approach to innovation. So we don't just think about technology development, we think about leadership development. So we bring together clinicians, engineers, business development professionals. We put them in situ here at our health system at UCLA Health, which is a #1 health system here in California. And we allow them to go out and talk to the different stakeholders to identify unmet needs, to really understand what is it that will deliver innovation to patients, providers, and the rest of the community. So I'll pause with that and just with a note and getting the band back together. I've got the Robin of our team, Christian Johnson. I said Robin to Kwame's Batman.
Yeah, definitely a subtle inside band joke. I was going to say, I don't know if I'm the drummer here or if the guitarist or where we all sit in this, so we'll have to come to that. Thank you so much. It's a privilege. I'm Christian Johnson, founder and CEO of Scout Medics. I had the privilege of partnering with Kwame and Jennifer on the study, but also being a beneficiary and a senior fellow at UCLA Biodesign, led by Dr. Jennifer McKinney here. I also serve as the head of strategy and growth for Ascendia, that Kwame mentioned, a novel platform helping MedTech companies and particularly regulatory organizations accelerate time to market and access for patients to novel technologies. And I'm just humbled and honored to be here. Big gratitude to Matter for its commitment to innovation in this ecosystem and supporting these educational events, and also to Orthogonal, just a really important partner, stakeholder, and honored to be back since our last session here at Matter with David Van Sickle from Propeller Health.
Great. And Bernhard, introduce yourself. You're on mute.
Sorry, Bernhard Keppe, the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. I think Randy's already talked a little bit about Orthogonal, but you know, I've always been interested in ways that we could bring sort of the benefits of software eating the world into the MedTech space, and how we could drive innovation faster. And so this area of sort of evidence generation, and how we could potentially use digital technologies and the building of digital ecosystems around medical devices or purely SAMD products has been, you know, very interesting to me. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. So let's get going, and I'll share with the panelists and with the whole audience. I sort of have 5 or 6 core questions, each of which is targeted at one of our panelists, but you are all welcome to join in and discuss as we go through here. And it's possible that we will only have time for those 5 or 6 questions to get to nothing else. But if not, I have a whole list of follow-on questions that we can dive into. But really, let's take this discussion wherever we think it's productive for ourselves and the audience. And audience, the only way we know that is if you put in questions and comments for us in the chat area here. All right, so let's start. Jennifer, what did you learn? Like, why is the topic of today's webinar interesting to you? And how does that relate to the MedTech study?
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Great question. I think from where I sit uniquely, I'm both at sort of that genesis of technology development. So from that very sort of aha moment, right? Sort of whether it's in the OR or in a clinical exam room, all the way through to the translational piece where we bring technologies back into the health system. And a lot happens between those two endpoints, right? And I think initially when we had Kwame, and I mean, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago? I think I was sort of like nudging Kwame for a few years, like, hey, what do you think about this? If you recall, there was a seminal study out of Stanford led by Josh Mackauer in 2010 that really looked at some of the major roadblocks to MedTech innovation. And really what it came down to almost 14 years ago now is that regulatory processes at that time were considered a significant hurdle to market. And what myself and Kwame and others, including you all on the call and some of our audience members today, we're probably seeing is a shift, right? Because we had this kind of, I don't want to call it an avalanche, we'll call it a slow roll of regulatory, of policies designed to increase regulatory efficiency, if you will. And we really wanted to understand, was that effective? Is regulatory still the thorn in most MedTech manufacturers' side, both big and small, right? Because large MNCs, multinational corporations, face very different challenges from a startup founder who Christian may not have mentioned, but he's also wearing a startup founder hat as well, and has his own venture in flight. So what are those challenges when you've got a burn rate of $10, $20, $30, $100,000 a month, and you need to keep the lights on at your startup, but you also need to get the regulatory approval? So we really sought to understand, was regulatory still a barrier, both financially with respect to cost of keeping the lights on, if you will, as well as the time it took, because burn times time is really what is going to impact that startup company, not so much for the large manufacturers. So we sought to interview about 100 different companies, both large and small, and really understand some of both the quantitative and qualitative challenges within the US, but also outside of the US. Because anecdotally, again, 15 years ago, one of the major findings of Josh Mackauer's study was that the US was lagging Europe, right? We were very far behind. Our patients were losing out on transformative technologies because manufacturers were going ex-US first to market. And I'll pass the baton back to my co-authors to really talk about some of those findings. But we really, the gist of it is along with our partners from Boston Consulting Group who led that publication, is that the tables have turned. And with the tables turning, I think it goes back to, Randy, the point you just made, is that we're beaming into you here from Los Angeles, and I always make the analogy of Star at Us Weekly, and there's that page where it says stars, they're just like us. Regulators, they're just like us. They're real people. Kwame can probably speak to that firsthand. And really, I think reimbursement is the new regulatory, right? And here we are sitting here today. So I'll pass it back. That's just a little bit of kind of the story and how we got to undertake this work.
That's great. Thanks for that perspective. And I think it's great that you can bring perspective of the study as somebody who helps develop MedTech, and also somebody who really understands the inner workings of how large healthcare delivery systems actually bring in new technology, evaluate, bring in, and or reject, as the case may be. So Kwame, you've got a fascinating resume. There's a lot of people who have been at the FDA who now work out in industry and share that knowledge. I don't know of a lot who are now also investors. So that's a really interesting lens that you've been both looking at devices improving and bringing to market, and now looking at, can we actually, at the end of the day, even if we get past everything else, still make some money?
Yeah. And one of the reasons I was delighted to work with Jennifer in this study is we were able to also mine PitchBook and look at information from John Norris at the time at SVB to understand at the time, approximately 4 years ago, how much capital it took for a 510(k) device to go from concept to clearance, and how much time it takes. And we had the aha moment that Jennifer described of what is the new pain point. But getting back to this conversation about data, from an investor perspective, we had benchmark data. An investor can say, and I use it regularly. Jennifer, you don't know this, but I use it regularly in saying, okay, if we're evaluating a de novo product, we know the median time from concept to clearance is 5 years. And we know they're at working prototype stage. We can back calculate as investors that piece of it. But more importantly, and we're going to talk about it, we have a lot of time to talk about it, think about how they optimize their data to get through all those pain points, the investor pain point, the regulator pain point, the payer pain point, and the provider pain point in an optimal manner. And I'm excited to talk about that part of it.
Great. So interesting, none of us have been at payers, but there is a payer perspective, and I think all of you have had exposure to payers. So I'll throw it as a free-for-all of who wants to talk a little bit about how payers are looking at this, obviously understanding that, I don't know if a CMS is the 800-pound gorilla or a 600-pound gorilla that everybody kind of walks in their path afterward, but we could share a bit about that.
I'm happy to, I'll kick off on that and then pass the torch back to my colleagues. When I think about this, I think about my time at my alma mater, Edwards Life Sciences. I joined Edwards and was there for about 4 years. I was a part of the inaugural strategy leadership development program, and then transitioned and led strategic planning for the new transcatheter mitral and tricuspid business. One of the things that, and when we talk about the study, really stood out to me as a key takeaway was that shift from the importance of reimbursement now for not only private ventures, but also even the mid-cap, large-cap multinationals when navigating the pathway to the US. And tying back to that, when we talk about CMS and MACs and determining local coverage determination for novel technologies and the payment and coverage and coding available for those new technologies, I think the TAVR story is a phenomenal example, a case here of where some ventures may focus very much in a stepwise approach to understand the requirements from the FDA perspective for safety and effectiveness of the device and getting the device cleared. There's this whole other bridge once available in market to ensure that your device is covered and that there's payment for it and there's coding for it. We can dive more into that. And when we look at a technology like TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement, where over 10 years ago, this was a whole shift in the industry for interventional cardiologists and the cardiac surgical community, where the standard of care was to provide a surgical valve replacement for patients. And Edwards Life Sciences introduced a transcatheter valve technology. And one of the things that they did tied to this point and tied to reimbursement and payers here that's so important is they took a very early stance with the partner trials on developing healthcare economics data along the journey in their clinical trials. How does this technology not only reduce length of stay for patients, How does it reduce risk of readmissions? How does it improve utilization of care? What does this do for the patient's long-term cost benefit as well as the health systems? And making that case and that data package and being able to go to CMS and then also to all the private payers and make the case for that. Yes, this is a whole new therapeutic intervention, but look at the benefit it has for these inoperable and high-risk patients that right now have no alternative or no better alternatives. That's an incredible story. And we've seen that reflected with many cases now too, with from a strategic benefit, companies like the Relievant Med Systems is a fascinating case. They were just acquired by Boston Scientific for $850 million upfront in cash payments. And they took a very interesting and relatable pathway where they not only obtained FDA clearance approval in 2019, spent the last 4 years developing real world evidence and publishing that data to show the clinical benefit, but upon also doing healthcare economic studies to show the cost benefit, and get coverage with large players like Cigna and Humana and others, in addition to CMS. That was a big trigger for, I think, the acquisition. They had major success story. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's really important for bringing back for the strategy early on, how important healthcare economics data is to think ahead, in addition to the safety and efficacy data for making that case to CMS and the private payers. Why is this device important from a healthcare economics perspective for patient providers, but also for payers to reduce the overall cost burden on the health system? So with that, let me pass it to my colleagues. Maybe that helps spark some ideas.
I'll go next on this. I used to really just think that, we get this through the FDA and, the commercialization will take care of itself. And the reality is that each of these different stakeholders cares about different things, right? And if you're only meeting one stakeholder's needs with what you're doing, you're not going to be successful. Unfortunately, a lot of this is fairly opaque, especially on the payer side, but I'm going to make some gross generalizations, right? CMS is in many cases the 800-pound gorilla, where it's easier to say, okay, CMS has made a coverage decision, and we as a private insurer can follow this. That's not always the case, because there are areas where CMS isn't really involved. There are also areas where potentially, things that kind of self-insured large employers care about, that maybe CMS doesn't care about. But if you look at CMS, right, you would think of CMS as a public health agency, but really that is not how CMS was designed originally. CMS it was designed as a benefits administration organization, similar to Social Security, and they're funded in a similar way. So their overhead for making decisions on coverage is very, very low, which means in practice they have very little leeway for analyzing and looking at the vast volume of things. So if you don't fall into an existing benefits category, it is really, really difficult to get something to happen. Near impossible. You have to go through other channels to make something like that happen. And so that's one of the big challenges, is even if you come with all the evidence, if you're not already in an existing benefits category, really, really difficult to make something happen. The other part is, even if you are in one and you have something novel, there is a natural conservatism here, because you could be opening up a whole set of new costs. So they very much at this point also care about that health economic evidence are you going to reduce the costs, not 5 years down the road, not 10 years down the road, but immediately, right? Those are the things, the types of things where CMS really, perks up and is more likely to look at something. If you can say, we're going to slash the cost in year 1 by X amount, year 2, et cetera, by Y amount, that's much better than something much later for them.
And I would guess that they're probably take a pretty critical view of any claims around, oh, we'll save you all this money, because they're on the hook for the for the cost if it doesn't. All right, so let's address one more stakeholder group, the fourth one, and then let's get into a little bit of, okay, so like, what do we do about this? What are the solutions, and why is this in many ways a digital story? Why does that come in? So let's talk about providers who don't seem to be having a lot of fun these days, as far as I can tell. They are just worn out from COVID, under reimbursed, and just sort of taking it from all sides, as far as I can tell. I see it as much at home with friends who are physicians. They all just look tired these days. So Jennifer, I've got a great new device. It's going to do great new things. It can really improve patient outcomes. You're going to buy it at UCLA, right? We're slam dunk.
Is that a question or
Yeah, it's a facetious question, but why isn't it a slam dunk when I bring something to UCLA that it's just going to be, oh yeah, this is a better MRI than the last one. This is a better, splint, whatever. Why is it not a slam dunk that it automatically gets brought in?
Yeah. Randy, I completely agree. And, speaking, just broadly across, from the seat of, providers across the country, right? We're facing, tremendous pressure from macroeconomic trends related to reimbursement, aging population, as well as reduced reimbursement, right? And that goes back to what I think Bernard just spoke about a minute ago. But certainly, I think we all know on the call today, right? There's sort of this front end of the health system, and many people interpret that to be a value analysis committee, right? And what I think sometimes is misunderstood, the value analysis committee is kind of like your last stop before you get a decision. It's not your first stop. Sometimes I'll see friends at conferences. They're like, "Oh, can you introduce me to someone on the value analysis? I want to know how to better get like." That's not the right question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, who are the physician leaders and champions in my field that are actively speaking at conferences, doing these procedures, really sort of leaders in transformative practice of medicine? And from there, a lot of times those thought leaders drive local physician leaders, and those local physician leaders, wherever it is that you'd like to do your regional rollout, maybe it's where you got a good MAC coverage decision. I'm not sure. You kind of got to looking at all the data together. So if there's not good regional coverage, maybe you don't go to Southern California first. Maybe you go to where there's a higher incidence of your population that you're going to have more traction within that health system. And I see that when folks are just going for the top AMCs, the large academic medical centers, and sometimes those aren't the right first customers, depending on what your product is, particularly for digital, because of the cost of the training, the infrastructure, the cybersecurity, the data governance. All of those pieces can tend to be somewhat, I'll use the word protracted, but what I really mean is it can take longer in a larger system, particularly for digital occasionally. When we get back to sort of the traditional device that you mentioned, if we look like a TAV or another technology, going back to sort of an anecdote of the VAC, right? A lot of times what I will see is, again, and this is more my, Randy, you and I talked about this on the prep call, but this is like a public service announcement for those that are wanting to go to a health system. And the way that it usually works, let me just break down the process. So by the time you get to a VAC, you already had a physician champion, you already have clinical data, you have additional comparative effectiveness data with respect to health economics or longer term outcomes or otherwise. We're not just looking at a 30-day window when a technology is taken into a large health system. And so what that means is you've done all this kind of pre-work. Maybe that's taken you 6 months, maybe that's taken a year, maybe it's taken you 10 years from start to finish, right? And kind of anecdotally, on top of that, I'll just say that in addition to, the reboot of the study that we did 2 years ago, Stanford Biodesign and Duke put out a paper looking at the average time to get reimbursement after FDA clearance. And what they found on average for national Medicare coverage and national or commercial insurance coverage, 4.7 years. So if we kind of look at the work that we've done, where we're looking about 3 years concept to FDA authorization, plus 5 years on top of that. Okay, so at least 8 years, and then you're coming to us, right? You're coming to a large health system. What I often see is this is for a grain of salt, what it's worth. I see when that physician champion comes to present at a value analysis meeting, the company or manufacturer will hand that physician their sales deck. And I just want to be super clear. The staffing person that you send into an OR or IR, wherever it is, in the red scrubs, is not going to be delivering the same message that you're delivering to a VAC. And the message should be different. And there's many reasons it should be different, because that sales pitch slide, whether it's this big manufacturer or small manufacturer, is really designed for the investor. That's designed to tell you, what is my billion-dollar market? But if I'm sitting at the chair of a VAC at a large health system, I don't want to hear that you're going to treat every patient in my health system, in my hospital initially, right? Because the cost, scope, the metrics of doing that would not be economically feasible, right? So it's almost the reverse. When you're thinking about pitching your deck and you've got that sales deck and you want to present the large market, when you come back into the health system to present your economic value proposition with respect to the patient, you want to narrow it. I want you to tell me, what is the patient population specifically that over the next year I can track, monitor, measure, and really understand the economic as well as the clinical benefit to that patient, as opposed to telling me you're going to treat hundreds on a monthly, daily, weekly basis. And so I would really encourage you all to prepare that physician champion. Often I see physician champions coming in and they've just been handed a deck. And it's a little bit like the left is talking and doesn't know what the right is doing. Really think thoughtfully about what are those materials you're giving to your physician champion when you are presenting to a value analysis committee. It is not the same deck. It is not the same message as the one that your sales team is giving when they're working, outside a hospital system. So that's just kind of personal ask. Really think thoughtfully, think about the patient, think about that specific patient population that you're going to help, because it will be very well received by the clinicians sitting in that room who are thinking and focused on the patient and patient outcomes.
Jennifer, if I may actually ask you a follow-on question there, leaning into what the examples you shared, but also looking at some of the Q&A here. On a case-by-case basis, like, what might you expect the type of package of data or evidence to be presented at VAC look like if you're looking on one spectrum, like an implantable, another spectrum, like you mentioned, maybe a digital solution, maybe it's something for monitoring, hemodynamic monitoring in the ICU or a critical care setting. Another one could be a diagnostic. Hopefully not putting you too much on the spot there with those different cases, but could you talk about that a little bit?
Great question, Christian. I think what it comes down to is those 3 types of devices might be looked at in 3 very different settings. So a strictly digital might come in through the CIO's team, right? So the digital purchasing arm. The diagnostic, depending on the price and where it falls, if we're looking at somewhere on the north side of $20,000 plus or minus, depending on the health system, that's going to go in as a large CapEx expenditure. Certainly if it's a bedside monitoring tool or an add-on digital tool, like for example, a Hemosphere, in the case of looking at Edwards product line, that's going to come in through a value analysis committee. But each one of those has a different process and it's different in every health system. I think in terms of what does your data package look at, and getting back to what we're here talking about, certainly there is that, right? I'll just pause by saying when a technology gets to the point of a value analysis committee, it is assumed to be safe and effective, right? Because at some point you have to lean on the FDA to say, would this product have gotten to market? Now, that being said, we've had cases where certainly products, and we can all list probably a dozen off the top of our head amongst the group, where data has come back and there have been recalls. Products have been taken off the market. And so sometimes you have the case of a new technology coming in to replace a technology that is no longer clinically effective, right? So there are caveats to this story, but certainly, integration with existing workflows and infrastructure is very important. And it goes back to whether it's digital or an actual device. Do I need to make changes to my OR setting? Do I need to make changes to the clinic setting? Is it going to change workflow? Is there additional training required, digital or otherwise, in terms of integration with Epic and all the other follow-on pieces that I'm sure Bernard and Randy can speak to very, very with expertise. The availability of a physician champion, certainly, but also how will this spread across the department? Is it going to be one physician working, or is it going to be, everyone across orthopedics will be using this device, right? Because what we're sort of, and I think of this sort of like the Lord of the Rings analogy, but is it one robot to rule them all? Or, how many robots can you actually fit in one orthopedics department, right? As we look at, the surge of robotics in healthcare, right? And, it's, yes, we have Da Vinci and we have others now, but there's only so much floor space, right? My second grade son is doing a bedroom map product, and he's, we have to do the same thing as adults. Like, there's only so much square footage for all the robots, right? They can only go so many places. And then looking at sort of total cost of ownership, right? What is the maintenance and the ongoing training required, whether it's disposables or warranty, all of those pieces over the lifetime of the product. And you're really thinking about those up front. It's not just the initial point of purchase. We all know good MedTech business model has a follow-on revenue component, whether you're a SaaS-based model in the case of digital, or you're a device with a disposable or semi-disposable component. So looking at all of those in totality, certainly, I'm not urging, there's that idea of sort of the sticker shock of it. But I would think it's really important to be upfront about the longitudinal cost of ownership, because health systems do look at it, and we do come back and do sort of a look back. So after a year, most health systems will come back and do a look back and say, like, okay, did you meet this? And we go back to sort of those initial things when you're giving a pitch, right? What's your credibility with your investors? That leans to credibility. And if you're a serial manufacturer, you want to establish credibility. And I think doing so up front when presenting a value analysis package will certainly be helpful. The one other thing that I'll say is some health systems will actually partner with you, which is very common in large academic medical centers, and they will look at your device as it relates to their patient population and their data. Now, that's something that's very important, because we all know patient populations are not the same across different regions and health systems. And so I think when you have health systems that are willing to do that, that's kind of a harbinger of, we want to work together and this is a partnership. So I would encourage you to ask yourself, when you talk to your physician champion, say, do you work together in terms of preparation of that presentation for the back? Because having the data within the patient population that health system treats is incredibly important. It's something that certainly UCLA is committed to, and I know other large health systems are as well.
Awesome.
I would add just some one more wrinkle to this, especially for a lot of digital products, right? These are things that are, let's say, deployed outside of a clinical setting. Very often they're deployed, at home, they're in patient hands, data is collected that way. And there's certainly physician fear in many cases about, okay, is this good data? All of those types of things that you can alleviate. But the other part is this going to create more work for me that I'm already buried up to here in work, right? And so addressing those kinds of concerns and being able to make arguments that you're actually either reducing work, or that additional work is work that you can be reimbursed for is critical. The other part of that to be careful about is those physician champions that you have at the beginning. They're what in a lean startup approach would be called early evangelists, right? They are already bought in. They're not the middle of the market or the late market, and they might not care about that much because they're passionate about that specific problem and solution. So for down the line commercialization and getting to a larger market, you do have to think about those things as well, especially for digital solutions.
Thanks for that perspective. So let me drop one thing on to make everybody have more of a headache about the challenge, and then let's talk about the opportunity and why this is not all for naught, and actually why I think in many ways there's reason to be hopeful, among which is that this is now being given a name by many people in the industry and being addressed as a thing, whereas I don't know if it really was as an industry, I think. So all of this discussion so far has been solely US based. If you intend to bring your device to any other market, every other market you bring it to you have to repeat these questions with different answers because you're dealing with different regulators, different payment systems, not just different payers, but just different payment systems and different providers. And the way I say it is to paraphrase the former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, who said all politics is local. All healthcare is local, right? The way patient populations are different, but also the practice of medicine is very different, regionally in the US based on who you train with, globally, it's the realities are very different. So you don't just ask you don't try and solve this n-dimensional puzzle once. It's to the power of every country you're going to. So with that challenge in mind, let's talk about the good news, which is, I think, I'll start with Bernhard. There's a good digital story here. There's things that we're able to do now that I don't think we were as easily able to do 10, 20 years ago. The idea of integrated data and evidence is being enabled by a whole suite of tools in the whole kind of data lifecycle. And I think, Bernhard, 4 years ago, you introduced me to the term evidence curve, and how you can leverage the data for the evidence. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about kind of the range of things that are letting us actually say, oh, let's take an integrated approach. Because these days, I'll close with this. It was probably 20 years ago, if you were at a device company, you say, well, I want to take an integrated approach, but the tech people can't support it, so it's not possible. Now it's possible. Now it's up to these organizations to actually make it happen internally. So what's possible?
Yeah, so I will say, look, the inexorable eating of the world by software, by digital, helps in all of these things, right? So how cheap sensors are, how much power processing, et cetera, is in smartphones, how much we have in the cloud, how much we are able to combine data, et cetera. The cost of acquiring data of certain kinds or of many kinds is dramatically lower, right? And so that's there was a question in the chat on when should you think about your data strategy. And I would say as early as you possibly can, and thinking through kind of all of these different folks. Now, because in many cases, because it can be very cheap to acquire the data, doesn't mean it's easy to do so. But because the costs are a lot lower, you can design your system for that type of data acquisition, both, patient behavior, symptoms, outcomes, et cetera. All of these types of things are easier to get at with digital technologies, whether they are digital companions to a device, or they are purely, digital products. Especially in those areas where they're, outside of the hospital, or there's a component for that. If you think about patient engagement, one of the things that is always a kind of a big and important thing there is, what are you giving them in order to engage? And the right data packaged in the right way for them is very often really useful to give patients agency, so that they feel that they have some more control over their condition or their situation. And when you do that, very often they are willing to give you more data because that feeds back into their process, and you can potentially create a virtuous circle. That's super powerful. I think you can apply similar things to the other participants, to healthcare providers as well, in terms of data that you are providing them, and then also data that you can potentially get from them to improve things as well. So that's the possibility, and that's something that that again is makes life easier for collecting all of this data. You still have to have a strategy and understand what the needs of all of those different participants are and when you can collect this data.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's good overview. Kwame, so
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, like, as an investor, how would you look at this and figure out when do I want to spend money on this kind of thing? Or do I think this team is capable of doing it? Or
Yeah,
wow.
Randy, as Bernard was talking, I was thinking about this notion of data lakes at the pre-seed stage and the seed stage. And I'll talk a little bit about Series A, but I spend most of my time with companies that have raised a pre-seed and they want our investment as a capital partner for a seed raise. And that pre-seed stage, you could have interviewed 100 providers. You could have gone through a biodesign type program where you have distinct value propositions for your top 1 or 2 personas of customers and start to build out the regulatory strategy for your first and second market. That all can be done in the pre-seed stage with minimal capital. And then with the seed stage, that data lake would be expanded to include funding of activities like a fully fleshed out HEOR, the FDA strategy, if that is indeed your first market. We've invested in digital health companies like Skin Analytics, where their first market was the UK, but with a fat seed, we coined that term in our prep call, a super seed. You could have an FDA strategy. See, you weren't at that prep call, Jennifer. We came up with a new term, the fat seed. With the fat seed, you could fund your UK strategy and your FDA strategy. Your HEOR could be done, at least a version 1 of that. And my firm has been working with a company called Sensei, which is a digital health solution to look at eye movements to aid in the diagnosis of PTSD. You could identify the 1 or 2 FDA programs that might help you build out your reimbursement strategy quickly, and that's the TAP program. Or you could explore an additional endpoint in your FDA study that may be helpful in gaining reimbursement down the road. And that would be with, instead of a $2 million capital raise, a $3, $4, or even $5 million seed raise to fund these data lakes. So that's a slightly new way of looking at capital in those 2 different phases. And then for Series A, just as an example, we invested in a company called Carlsmed that's software powered. We invested at the seed round, and they had submitted their 510K. Their Series A investor had already committed and was going to wire their money after 510K clearance, but they also use of funds for their Series A was to bring on commercialization leaders, et cetera. But they had breakthrough, NTAP, and MSIT. So they had reams of reimbursement, and they had to Jennifer's point, they had their top 10 clinical sites to pilot the product as soon as they got 510K clearance lined up and ready to go. So they had really thought through use of funds to get the data for several of those stakeholders that we talked about.
And I think that is another great, example. Now, getting all of those things lined up isn't so easy. Breakthrough is much easier than MSIT or TCET or what have you, right? Because again, CMS has such a small pipe. At AdvaMed, we're talking about what will it take to increase this from 5 products a year to 8 or 10 or 12, right? What additional funding do you need to do that? That's the volume we're talking about. So that means being one of those 5 companies in a year that gets that acceleration from CMS. I think, kind of almost before you have a data strategy, you have to really think that reimbursement part is, especially for novel technologies, is really right now the biggest barrier, Because if you're not on a path that already exists, then what you're doing in terms of the risk uh, for for your next round, you're layering that. It's going to be much later in the process, so you're making all of this investment with a big reimbursement risk after you get through your Series A or something like that. And in many cases, that is too much for a venture investor in those early stages to take if you don't have a clear path, right? So it's super important to get that worked through and then have your data strategy. It might actually also change what markets you go after first, right? US is a big market, but if you have that kind of a pathway, you may be better off finding a different market that has an easier pathway.
And just to build off of what Bernard mentioned, while we're obviously a global virtual society where, you can easily connect over Zoom, email, etc., it is so difficult and challenging to grow a market, get through the regulatory body in that given market. People still matter, and where they're physically located, in my experience, still matter. So if you say we're going to get through the UK regulatory body, the odds of that are significantly increased if you have a local regulatory consulting partner there, or you have a director of reimbursement located director of regulatory located in that country, in that market. And that's something as investors we do ask about. What footprint do you have there? What boots on the ground do you have there? Because as much as we can get done via email, it's nothing like having a local partner that understands the local customs and nuances. Yeah.
Kwame, can I ask a question? Because a significant percentage of this audience is startups. So some of them might have been really perked up by the fat seed concept. Like if they were going to pick it up and use it today, how ready is the investor market to hear this story? Do you have any advice for them if they're going to, run with this right after this webinar?
Candidly, the investors that I co-invest with, Wavemaker co-invest with, aren't that sensitive when it comes to a $2 million round versus a $5 million round. If I gave rough numbers, after 5, then the data needed, the de-risking needed becomes significantly higher. So, and in this macro environment, investors are really concerned about runway. So your story could look something like this. We're raising $5 million, not only to extend our runway and create a strong Series A story, but we're going to build these data lakes to speak to the providers, the payers, and the regulators. Everyone will expect that you have a regulatory strategy laid out, but it is not difficult to use $5 million to generate initial evidence for payers, providers, and handle regulatory. And I think most investors would nod and say, yes, we understand there's use of funds. And will it take longer to raise 5 million versus 2 million? Yes, but I don't think an investor would walk away from a $5 million raise if they're a true seed investor. Yeah.
So there's room for a couple million more if you've got a really good plan for how it's going to
absolutely
set you up.
Absolutely.
Are you now thinking like, gee, I wish we'd been doing this for 10 years?
I must be very transparent. I thought when we stumbled upon that concept and this current macro environment, investors actually want you to have plenty of runway, but it's more than runway now. Now we can layer on, Randy, just like you said, hey, we're going to make the strongest possible data story in preparation for this Series A. And yes, I kind of wish we had come up with it a long time ago, Randy.
Well, you heard it here first, everybody. This is the first public drop of the fat seed.
The trademark is already in with the PTO, so no one can steal it.
Okay, excellent. I think you're joking, but Otherwise, you're moving very fast. All right, so we've got some audience questions here we should open it up for. I know some people are gonna start dropping off at the end of the hour, so let's get to these. And actually, I'm really pleased. We've really kind of covered the suite of topics here. Audience, you can tell us back, but I think we hit breadth without too much depth, you know, the inch deep. How do diagnostic devices fit in and compare to other medical devices?
Ooh, I like this one. May I take a first stab? So I spent, this is coming from a position I spent a year, nearly 2 years as head of product, vice president of product for an in vitro diagnostic company. Throughout the pandemic, we were one of the largest providers worldwide of COVID-19 rapid tests, immunoassays. But during my time there, my core focus was on evaluating, answering the question of what do we do beyond COVID, because that was really our birthplace for pandemic response and in the in vitro diagnostic market. And two, our strategy was to evaluate and invest in emerging technologies in the diagnostic landscape for our portfolio expansion throughout Europe and Asia Pacific. And a lot of the lens we looked at when we did our diligence, I reviewed nearly around 100 different diagnostic technologies, everything from biomarker discovery platforms to point of care diagnostic lab on chip type solutions, a whole 9 yards. One of the most important things we look at in the technical phase and the clinical phase when we look at the data was not only what's the sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy of these and how does it compare. In an immunoassay market, a well-established marketplace, it's very important at that point that you have to be at least at minimum equivalent, because then your offering comes down to price and other factors. But for things like a novel point of care diagnostics platform that's looking at the proteins or using a blood-based sample, which has become a more emerging market with molecular diagnostics, it's now about other data points too. That's more related to workflow in the primary care provider's office. For example, if you're trying to test for anything from a UTI to a respiratory infection, you're not just looking at ensuring sensitivity and specificity are on point, but you're looking at how long does it take for this molecular diagnostic to get me a result? Can I get an answer either negative or positive within 20 to 30 minutes so that I could give this patient a response right here, bill for that, not require a follow-on telemedical consult and visit. And so there's a lot of workflow dynamics that are really important when we look at frontline diagnostics. As we get to more complex fields, looking at like next-gen sequencing with Illumina and those types of practices, it's a whole nother landscape. But that's something I would encourage you look at is data points and evidence, not only pertaining to false positive, false negative, et cetera, but also how large is this on my bench? You know, what's the size of this, the form factor? Take a look at all the other devices out there and how much space is it actually, per Dr. McKinney's point, like how much space is this going to take up if it's in a small clinical practice? Those are inputs that are really essential to work backwards from, knowing what the landscape's going to look like in 2 years from now or 1 year from now, depending on how close that device is to being commercialized or if it's commercialized already in other markets.
The only thing I would add from a regulatory perspective is the Center for Devices proposed upregulation of LDTs such that many of them that are currently unregulated would need a 510K. And, you know, I know Bernard just came from AvaMed. That's an area of increased interest from an industry perspective. So diagnostic companies may want to be thinking about their quality management system. Is it established in accordance to ISO 13485 or 21 CFR 820? And if not, how do they get ready, get that early start by, at a minimum, installing a compliant quality system? That's my only additional thought for diagnostics.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, this has particularly been the case with any DNA and RNA type testing, right? Where initially they thought they could all just be CLIA waiver, and then one or another ended up going the 510K route. Now basically everyone in that market has to do it. So I think that's that makes a difference. I think there are some other options, especially around things that are sort of whether you call them digital diagnostics or clinical grade diagnostics on computer platforms. That's an emerging area. I think that one is, I think in the US in particular, challenging from a reimbursement perspective, right? Because in many cases, this is something that's going to be in consumers' hands, right? And then in general, anything that is going to be over the counter or in consumer hands, the threshold that the FDA requires is significantly higher. And then from a reimbursement perspective, again, this is the kind of thing that could open up the floodgates of expense for a payer if they're going to reimburse this, and you definitely need to be able to show cost reductions from the get-go if you're going to do things in that space, right? Or it's an area where people are willing to pay out of pocket for this type of thing, for the convenience, etc. One of the things I've seen in that space is in a lot of emerging markets, the infrastructure for point of care diagnostics is not very well built out, and there are opportunities there if you can demonstrate effectiveness that you could potentially deploy those kinds of digital diagnostics in those markets, really kind of leapfrogging the way a lot of payment systems around smartphones, etc., or just plain phones were leapfrog in emerging markets before they came to the US. So that's another strategy, especially for in that space, that's worth considering. Where you don't just have a better mousetrap, but you're fulfilling a need in the market that is just not being met.
I hope everybody's taking notes. By the way, I'll reiterate, the video of this will be posted online because I don't think there's any way you could take all these notes in it at once. All right, so we had one question that I'll ask, but it's a rhetorical question for me, but I think it's a genuine question from somebody at startup, which is, where do I go to read what data exactly payers and purchasers want? Where's the checklist?
It's not there.
Yeah,
it's not published. Yeah.
In my experience, the strongest CEOs engage with a reimbursement expert, and they make first contact and start talking about what pilot data a regional payer may find interesting and useful, what endpoints are they interested in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've never seen a CEO said, oh, I went to this website and there's a playbook and there's a menu you go to. I just don't think it exists.
Would it be possible if somebody wanted to take it on, or is it really not even possible?
I will say that that evidence is not something that you can look at broadly. It is very much disease state specific, the health economics of that disease state. How big is that in terms of outlays or number of patients as well, right? For an individual insurer, whether you're going to get the mind share, even if you have great individual health economic outcomes, if it's a small population and we're talking about small numbers, those aren't the big problems that a payer is typically trying to solve, right? And that goes, I think, for everyone in that chain of stakeholders as well. In cardiac rhythm, they care about different things than they care about in diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, etc. So it's complicated, and there is no just go look it up kind of thing.
You need an expert with you. You need the right consultant. So we've got a bunch of really specific questions, but then there's one that I think is really interesting. Let's go on without a net a little bit and take a chance here. Somebody asked about their kind of device, but why don't we do a quick case study? And let's tackle one device together and talk about this. I don't think we'll give them all the answers. It's interesting. The question is, what type of data would you look for in a device aimed to long COVID treatment? Now, we may have to presuppose that there's a single disease called long COVID that has a cure, as opposed to it being, you know, what it's starting to look like 45 different things. But somebody comes to you, what would you advise them to start pulling together?
Assuming they're early stage, do they have a partnership with a tier 1 academic hospital center such that they could access some data set that's clean to do a retrospective study that hopefully is not super expensive, to get some pilot data that on there, I'm assuming it's software powered just because it's 2024. And they have either some initial accuracy data that from a trusted source of data. That's my initial thought, you know.
And I would look at, I mean, the question is, are we doing like screening? Are we doing a diagnostic? Are we doing a therapy, right? Those are all different things that you might look at, and sort of the data that you care about and collect might be different, right? And for the therapy, let's just say it's a therapy. How do you measure effectiveness of your therapy? How long does it take to measure to show benefit? And then working backwards from that, what is the cost to the system of that condition being untreated, right? If that is not really a funded mandate right now for CMS or for insurers, that we're treating one, we know what long COVID is, we know how to diagnose this, and we know, you know, what effective treatment is, and there is funding for treatment of long COVID. Those are all things that are potential barriers. But let's assume it's all funded and everything like that. Then those are the questions of how quickly can you both create benefit for the patient, and how quickly can you take cost out of the system.
If I'll add one last piece, and it's primarily looking at it, I think, from an endpoints perspective, because long COVID's definitely got a bundle of either comorbidities associated with it. You know, we have reported quality of life implications, recurrence, risk of reinfection. This is an area that I know there's a lot more emerging research around and insights around here. And so I don't claim to be an expert in long COVID, but I would take a look at what are those kind of halo endpoints and outcomes that are most closely associated and tied to long COVID that you'd want to evaluate from a clinical study perspective, and of course align through a regulatory expert with the FDA on what those outcomes should be as your primary, secondary endpoints. So that's just another, but I think maybe I'll pass the torch to Dr. McKinney, because I know UCLA has been doing deep, but yeah, if there's any extra thoughts on your side on this.
Let me make the device a little more specific in a hypothetical sense for you to respond to, okay? Somebody's developed a combination product of a nebulized delivery treatment and a drug that can have restorative properties on the lungs, which can therefore address some of the long COVID issues. And they're coming to UCLA saying, I want to do a, I want to develop this device, this combination product that I think will heal people of certain elements of long COVID. What do I have to do to bring that into UCLA? Early stage, not when it's on the market, but early stage. Let's start.
Thanks, Randy. And again, I can speak broadly, not specifically to what UCLA's opinion would be. I think Kwame and Christian covered a lot of sort of the specific potential considerations. What I can add is that, there's a lot of other products that fit this category on the market. And certainly, you know, just doing your homework, number one, going and look at those clinical studies, look at their endpoints, look at their descriptions, really think thoughtfully about which were successful, which were not, which sort of moved the needle and which provided the broadest outcomes. Now, with specific to long COVID, I guarantee you a lot of those outcomes are going to be the same. And you're gonna have to design, basically, I think the big decision is gonna be over what period would I need to measure those to show the efficacy? And really, what's the understanding right now in the pulmonary critical care community, and also, you know, cardiology and some of the other ancillary service lines, which we're also seeing impacts of long COVID, of course, depending on, again, which organ system you're looking at demonstrating outcomes in. You know, Randy, going to your comment of sort of like a curative treatment, certainly, you know, I don't even know if we can say how long COVID is cured right now in the clinical community. And I think it also depends on what state and zip code you're in, potentially. So that would be my primary recommendation, is looking at some of those other pulmonary respiratory diseases, because I think the playbook's out there. It's defined, and I think that the FDA has also indicated what they're looking for devices in that category.
I would add one. Sorry, Kwame, if you want to go next.
Oh, no, you go ahead, please.
I would add, especially for digital technologies, where again can be fairly easy, and especially if you're strategic to collect data, you should not only consider efficacy, right? Ultimately, you care about, for health economic outcomes, you care about effectiveness, right? And so people actually, it can't just be under ideal circumstances. It has to be in the, you want to collect real world evidence, and you want to provide means of improving adherence to therapies and thereby improve effectiveness as well, right? That has to be part of your data and engagement strategy longer term, right? Because you can get through the initial pilots, you can get through things, but at some point, the health economic question for something like that is going to be a big question that you have to answer.
Once, Randy, you expanded it to a combination product, it made me think of the profile of investor who would invest in this earlier and later on, and the sources of non-dilutive capital that may be available. I'll just spout off a couple just to de-risk this opportunity. One, assuming it's a massive market, and I'm not saying it is not, it's always nice if there's clinical or scientific ability for this to be a platform to treat multiple indications, so a roadmap. And if this is truly breakthrough, organizations like ARPA-H literally have billions of dollars that they need to put to work. And so if this person or company has line of sight to those sources of capital, it will de-risk one of the most complex products you can bring on the market, which is a combination product. And then if the last thing I'll say, if they have expressed interest from a strategic like a BD who says, we believe long COVID is going to be a problem, there is a market, that is a proof point where it puts less pressure on you to tell the story of a relatively new condition that isn't well understood. If you say, look, BD is expressed interest and we're going to do a JV to explore this further, those are ways to build a company, I think, that could really be successful.
This is awesome.
There was a question in here that I mistakenly was going to type the answer to, but changed to answer live, but I did not. So I'm going to answer the question live if that's okay. And it's from Alex Rivera. We are early in product development, but when is the best time to do a usability study? I think, you know, my answer to that, especially for digital products, is think about this the same way you would a consumer product or digital product. Early and often, right? Use things like 3 user Thursdays. Every 2 weeks or so, you have 3 users you're bringing in. Do you know 2 months from now what you're going to ask them? No, but you're going to continuously get feedback in the process and be able to make adjustments. And you're going to have a whole bunch of questions for those people that will help you improve your product, right? That then helps you if you need to do a formal human factors study for say a 510(k), you've de-risked a lot of the potential use errors as a part of that. And then all of this also helps when you're thinking about workflows. How do things fit into workflow? How do they fit into patient lives? That is not something you do in big usability studies. You get that in small chunks of learning about them, testing things, etc. And then once you are in a pilot, or you are you actually have live users, that's when things like product analytics come in, where you can actually see actual behavior and then feed that into your data lake and combine that with some of the other information. So early and often and continuously throughout the life of your product.
Randy, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. I want to say the panelists, you're doing something right, because we're now 80 minutes into a 90-minute webinar, and we've got 2/3 of our audience still here. So you're reaching people. Keep it up, folks. All right, so there were a couple questions I'll merge into one, which is a cross-cutting one. If you're going to have an integrated data strategy, forward-looking, strategic, all of this, how do you have an integrated consent, privacy, and cybersecurity strategy? What are the considerations beyond the normal stuff, which we didn't discuss? So this will be fun to hear your answers.
Yeah, so again, this was something that definitely is a hot topic for at the AdvaMed CEO Summit earlier this week. And I think, look, ultimately, there's the question of who owns the data, right? And fairly clearly, the patients own their data, right? Now, that means if you're using directly patients' data, you need permissions from them, right? You need to be very upfront on that, and how are you using the data? And obviously, with things like GDPR, HIPAA, et cetera, you need to be able to tell them how you're using the data, who has access to the data, all of that. But the other part of it is sort of there are really gatekeepers to a lot of that data, and then is data that is not patient specific. So those are things that very often still need to be worked out with hospital systems, with physician groups, and also with EMR vendors that are the gatekeepers to that. So as you are thinking about your data strategy and also your contractual relationships, take that into consideration, right? Hospital systems understand the value of the data that they are collecting and generating. And I've seen plenty of cases where medical device companies did not value the data early on and are having to pay large amounts of money to get that data later on from a hospital system.
Anyone else? No. Okay.
And then I think there's a cybersecurity piece of that as well, right? Look, for cybersecurity is something that you can either choose to not live in a connected world and have a device that is, totally isolated, in which case you're not going to get any of the benefits of being in a connected world. But you're also isolating yourself from cybersecurity concerns, right? In the vast majority of cases, the benefits outweigh the risks, but you have to take cybersecurity seriously. And when you are analyzing and mitigating risks of cybersecurity, you aren't limited to just your device. You have to look at this in terms of the cybersecurity of the entire ecosystem. It's a big tax on everyone, frankly. But there are third-party tools and good processes and things like that. But I can tell you from all of my interactions with the FDA that these are huge concerns for the FDA, and they're specifically in all of the guidance documents are saying it's not limited to your device. Even if your device on its own is secure by design, there are other attack vectors and you have to guard against those. And or if you are building out an ecosystem that is not purely device, those things end up falling under FDA cybersecurity inspection possibilities, et cetera, as well.
Very good. All right, so I got the gentle nudge from Kay that we are wrapping up the program. She's posted the link to the follow-on, which will be in 6 minutes. So a couple quick things. First of all, thanks again to the panelists. Just awesome conversation. You've set a high bar, but I want to do more on this. Thanks to the audience for sticking with us. Thanks to our partners at Matter. You guys are awesome. You continue to be awesome. We love working with you. We're around. Jennifer, we had a request. I was actually hoping you could send to us and we'll share with the attendees the 3 links to the 3 studies you mentioned, the original Stanford study, the UCLA follow-on study, and then the third one, which I think you said was Duke and Stanford. Okay, thumbs up. Thank you. You've got people's interest piqued. I'd recommend starting with study number 2, which is the UCLA one, because that's the most current and broad study, and these folks did an amazing job on it. All right, so I guess let's close with, I'll let each of you, well, first of all, everybody look up, down, left, and right like it's a Brady Bunch. You know, I wanted to see like, smile at people. Yeah, thank you. All right, I always wanted to do that.
Who is the youngest one in curls?
I had curls once upon a time, okay? So I'm the oldest one who had curls, maybe. Jennifer, you got it. Final words here. What's a key takeaway point for each of you that you like? If you just remember 1 or 2 things to the audience, what is it? I'm going to go by my box. So Kwame, you're top left.
Early on, have a point of view about each and every stakeholder and what data they need as a starting point, even if it's on a 1-page concept paper, to demonstrate you're being thoughtful and realize this is a long-term development program.
Bernard?
I would say don't wait on thinking about what your path to revenue is, what your if it is reimbursement or something like that, that is critical to actually getting something through, and understanding how hard that path is going to very much influence your strategy.
Excellent. Jennifer.
And you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
No, now you're good.
I think I'd love to share one of the insights we got from interviewing a lot of the startup CEOs in the study. And that is that I think we're all in consensus that reimbursement is the new hurdle. What I have heard from founders interviewed for both the study and, out in the ecosystem is that not necessarily everyone who's investing or involved with your company is going to be staying the course all the way to reimbursement, because often exit occurs after approval, breakthrough designation, first coverage decision, versus going the long haul. Because remember, we're looking at those 3 years plus another 4.7. So we're looking at 8 years minimum just to get full coverage. And so I would say choose your partners and investors very carefully, because if you don't have an investor board or board of advisors who's interested in staying the long haul, because again, we all have priorities, whether it's, it's return on funds that have a 5-year horizon or whatever it is, the goals and the data needed to get to us as a provider or a large payer might not be within the horizon that your advisors and investors are going to stay with you. And it's a big point of concern for startup founders. And I don't mean to kind of throw throw salt over in Kwame's corner of the screen, but it is real and it is what I have heard from the community. And maybe Kwame wants a counterpoint before we close, but I'll pass it back to you, Randy.
All right, Christian.
I think my co-panelists have just closed it excellently. So thank you to the band and the Brady Bunch here, which will be, I guess, the new summative conglomeration. I think the one thing I'll add, since a lot of the key points were taken, is just one stakeholder that's so important. All this, once again, is the patient. In this value-based system, patient-physician decision-making is just increasingly important, whether you're getting a heart valve, whether it's something now like Dexcom's historic clearance with an over-the-counter non-prescription based still OCGM, whatever it is, the patient is so important. So taking into account the inputs of what matters to them and what benefit it brings them, in addition to FDA, CMS, providers, et cetera.